Hey everyone, welcome back. We're continuing our reading of the Federalist Papers. We're on page 62 in James Madison essay number 14 titled Objection to the Proposed Constitution from Extent of Territory Answered. Okay. Such a fallacy may have been the less perceived, as most of the popular governments of antiquity were of the democratic species, and even in modern Europe, to which we owe the great principle of representation, no example is seen of a government wholly popular and founded, at the same time, wholly on that principle. Okay, so he's contending there's never been a nation that was founded on everything being wholly popular that was then popular at that same time. If Europe has the merit of discovering this great mechanical power in government, so the mechanical power of democracy, therefore of the people, they contend, by the simple agency of which the will of the largest political body may be concentered, so centralized, and its force directed to any object which the public good requires, America can claim the merit of making the discovery the basis of unmixed and extensive republics. It is only to be lamented that any of her citizens should wish to deprive her of the additional merit of displaying its full efficacy in the establishment of the comprehensive system now under her consideration. Okay, so lamented. So it's like, that her citizens should want to restrict merit that shows your full power and reducing the comprehensive system. So if it's not full, efficient and comprehensive, then you need to lament, essentially, and you shouldn't wish to deprive the betterment of your nation. Okay. As the natural limit of a democracy is that distance from the central point, which will just permit the most remote citizen to assemble as often as their public functions demand. So notice the remote citizen versus somebody who's in the city, so rural, right? It's remote meaning rural. So they need to be able to have access to their public function, right? He's contending. So you know that your democracy won't work if even the remote can't participate. It's working well if even the remote can have a function, and by essentially they have to if you want to use the people, right? Because that's what a lot of fighting comes in the United States is city folk and rural voters, right? They have different values because they live different lives, and will include no greater number than can join in those functions. So the natural limit of a republic is that distance from the center which we know, which will barely allow the representatives of the people to meet as often as may be necessary for the administration of public affairs. So representatives of the people meeting as often as necessary for how they're going to really lay everything out for the people whom they represent. Can it be said that the limits of the United States exceed this distance? Well, maybe back in the 1700s, but not today because the internet. It will not be said by those who recollect that the Atlantic coast is the longest side of the Union, that during the terms of 13 years the representatives of the United States have been almost continually assembled, and that the members from the most distant states are not chargeable with greater intermission of attendance than those from the states in the neighborhood of Congress. That we may form a juster estimate with regard to this interesting subject, let us resort to the actual dimensions of the Union. Okay, so the dimensions of the Union, so it looks like we're going to get into literal geography talk. The limits, as fixed by the Treaty of Peace, are on the east the Atlantic, on the south the latitude of 31 degrees, on the west the Mississippi, and on the north an irregular line running in some instances beyond the 45th degree, in others falling as low as 42nd. The southern shore of Lake Erie lies below that latitude, computing the distance between the 31st and 45th degrees, and it amounts to 973 common miles. Computing it from 31 to 42 degrees to 764 miles in half, taking the mean for the distance, the amount will be 868 miles and 3/4. The mean distance from the Atlantic to the Mississippi does not probably exceed 750 miles. On a comparison of this extent with that of the several countries in Europe, the practicability of rendering our system commensurate to it appears to be demonstrable. Okay, so I see what he's saying. Like, Italy geographically is going to be quite more petite, right? The center of Rome, the way in which they're governed. Britain is much smaller, even though they're a monarchy at this time, so they're not like a democracy in the sense of what the United States is attempting to fashion itself on, but yet a democratic republic, or not, well, constitutional republic. So remember, you have the people who wants the states their own confederacies versus one entire union. So him bringing up all these geographical points of degrees and miles is definitely something that troubled them back then, I see. Today would be concerns of proper communication. But back then it's also, how do you get the rural, those who are remote, to participate as much? And is it better to just have somebody to send on your way who you vote for, so you can contend to it? Or is it better to make sure that there's an infrastructure for voting that allows the farmer to take a day off and to go and vote, to where he has a polling place close enough to where he is, in order to make a democracy actually more representative of the people? Okay, fair point. It is not a great deal larger than Germany, where a diet representing the whole empire is continually assembled, or than Poland before the late dismemberment, where another national diet was the depository of the supreme power. Passing by France and Spain, we find that in Great Britain, inferior as it may be in size. You see what he said there? That's funny. He's like, the representatives of the northern extremity of the island have as far to travel to the National Council as will be required of those of the most remote parts of the Union. Okay, yeah. So we were definitely on the right track with where he was going about the issues. Favorable as this view of the subject may be, some observations remain which will place it in a light still more satisfactory. In the first place, it is to be remembered that the general government is not to be charged with the whole power of making and administering laws. Okay, wait a minute, yeah. Not to be charged with the whole power of making the laws and such. Okay. Its jurisdiction is limited to certain enumerated objects. Okay, look at that. Enumerated objects, which concern all the members of the Republic, but which are not to be attained by the separate provisions of any. The subordinate governments, which can extend their care to all those other objects which can be separately provided for, will retain their due authority and activity. Alright, retaining their authority and activity. Subordinate governments, okay. Were it proposed by the plan of the convention to abolish the governments of the particular states, its adversaries would have some ground for their objection, though it would not be difficult to show that if they were abolished, the general government would be compelled by principle of self-preservation, okay, propelled by the principle of self-preservation, lots of P's in that sentence, to reinstate them in proper jurisdiction. Okay. Government being compelled to do something that is proper is quite funny, because are they capable of that? So, essentially, really lets you lay down how he kind of pokes a little bit fun of Great Britain's inferior size, mentions Germany, Poland, Europe, the Atlantic to the Mississippi. Quite effective in the dimensions of the Union he described. Especially with the latitude concerning Lake Erie and such. So, well, different problem for them, not so much for us, but yet, at the same time, there's mass voter fraud that can happen, ballot harvesting that could happen. Even if you did have a properly functioning democracy where there was polling places, And then if it's online, people could hack it. So in person, but it's quite interesting. How will a democracy work versus, a representative republic, especially in a modern context? Quite good exercise to think about.